No way, Jose.
The following footage proves beyond any doubt that the tanks intentionally set the house on fire. It proves that the Branch Davidians were murdered. You can see that this tank has a gas jet on the front that shoots fire. You can also see the fire quite plainly. The tank goes into the house twice, and each time as it backs out, the fire at the gas jets is plainly visible.
We must all do more to recognize and look for the early warning signals that deeply troubled young people send.
Welcome to the No Way Jose podcast. We are watching part 7 of the What Really Happened in Watergate series. I am joined today by Austin Picard. We are about to get into that in a second, but before we do that, I want to let you guys know that today's episode is brought to you by NWJ Shave Co. If you want to get rid of that razor burn irritation and ingrown hairs caused by those deep multi-blade cartridges or deep penetrating multi-blade cartridges, then this is the way to go. Go back to traditional shave. You can shave just like your grandpa used to, whether you're shaving your whole face or just edging up your beard. The single blades give you a barber grade shave for a fraction of the price. The standard issue comes with one traditional safety razor in a box of 100 stainless steel razor blades. That's $75 to shave for an entire year. Let's be real, that's just an estimate. I mean, that's probably going to last you a lot longer. I've barely put a dent into mine. I've had it probably about a year. But if you're shaving on the regular, it just may not cut it. If you're shaving every single day, you may want to consider the Quarter Shave Club. That puts you at about 25 cents per replacement blade. He also has shave lathers and 3-in-1 body, hair, and face soap. Highly recommend that one. I dig that. It's a COVID mandate refusing company. That's literally how this company was born. You get a better product for a fraction of the price. It's a win-win. It's a no-brainer. Use code Jose for 10% off your entire order. With that, let's go ahead and get Austin in here and get to it. What's up, my friend?
What's up, brother? How's it going, man?
Good. You just got off the hype train of having Sam on our show, our weekly. For those, I guess, who aren't familiar with our weekly show, our weekly call-in show, we were able to get Sam on to join us. Our Already Dead that goes out to both of our platforms. God, the fucking cat snuck in here, I guess. What an asshole. I don't know if you can hear him. So it's a pleasure having you being back with you. It's the first time we've talked since that episode. So it's good to see you, bud.
Yeah, for sure, brother. My God, man. Honestly, I'm excited that we can finally get to this episode because it's been a long time coming, it feels like. Just for me personally, I think it's mainly because the longer that I sit with this sort of information and the longer it kind of like I have to like almost dwell on it, right? Because it's just the level of detail. It's kind of funny
quick, let's do something backwards today. I don't mean to cut you off, but I got a cat that snuck in our room and he's gonna keep making noise and bugging the shit out of me. So let's do something backwards. Can you go ahead and give the plugs for your show while I get up and grab this motherfucker, and then that way we won't have to do it at the end. Just letting you guys know now, this is where you can find all his wares. Go check his workout. Go support him. He does great stuff. But I'm gonna go grab this fucking cat while you do that. I'll be right back.
Oh yeah, it sounds good, brother. So everybody, you can find all my work at the Underclass Podcast. Really the best place to support me is on Buzzsprout or Patreon at the Underclass Podcast. Definitely go and subscribe to the YouTube as well, because we're trying to build that up mainly to be able to accept super chats, because that would be kind of a nice transition, especially for seeing as the fact that I haven't had YouTube monetized. It would be nice to finally have that, just another avenue, right, of some sort of, you know what I mean, uh um monetary, like I am a little bit desperate to at least offer some extra incentives to patrons as well. So I'm hoping as we grow the YouTube, hopefully, I'll be able to offer a few more, I don't know, creative incentives. Maybe I can get some more content going, like behind paywalls for a little while, and then make it public. Or I have to figure out some sort of model that will bring in some additional revenue. I think that that's kind of the next logical step, really, at this point. But
Yeah. I mean, it's a slow grind in this game, but it is what
yeah,
it is.
100%, buddy.
Yeah, I mean,
But damn,
unless you put in a ton of work, like especially whether it be production or like regular streaming, there
right.
is definitely or just like you just I guess get lucky to some extent too. There's that. But yeah, it really is a slow grind.
Absolutely, dude.
But I
Uh,
would say for that, I guess I don't know why we're fucking rambling about this because we're about to talk about Watergate. But I will say I have noticed that people who stream regularly, that seems to be the hack. So I don't
yeah.
know if you want to figure out some sort of format for your stuff going forward to stream regularly. I don't know, something that works for you, because audience engagement goes a long way, and it also like
It seems
all of
that
the
way.
stuff, algo stuff seems to favor that. So that's a good way to help grow your stuff if you're
Hmm.
trying to go that way. But
Yeah, that makes sense. I
yeah.
mean, I really just need to, as they say, diversify and add a few different layers to what I offer, I think, because
Mm,
I don't want to be pigeonholed into kind of, you know, I have a process, but I think that, there's also some additional value I can tap into elsewhere,
yeah.
that I don't necessarily have to approach things this specific way at all times, right?
Yeah.
But anyway,
Yeah, maybe start branching out, start doing interviews, stuff like that.
yep,
So yeah,
100%,
try
dude.
some new things. But yeah. Anyways, let's get back into Watergate. I got that pesky cat. Sorry, I threw off. I threw it off. It had a jilted start, made things a little bit weird. But we're popping back into Watergate. We're in part 7. Spoiler
Yeah.
alert: I don't think this is going to be the final episode for even though I've said it for 3 episodes now. But either way, where do you think? Where do you want to jump back in this grand narrative tale? Because I mean, really, we could jump in anywhere, but you're
Right.
the one crafting the tale here, so let us know where you want to jump back into this.
Man, I think really the place we should start, because it'll offer kind of a reintroduction to certain key characters, as well as like a kind of an efficient, um, rundown on the narrative here, which is certainly, I would say, considered to be a revisionist narrative, but it's much more plausible than that of the official narrative, which is typically the case with these, topics that we cover. But um, it's really this defamation lawsuit between Ida Maxey Wells and G. Gordon Liddy that I think is an important, really a great place to start, because it's important to point out, honestly, one, that John Dean, who's considered to be, right, White House aide, White House counsel to Nixon, really considered to be, the white knight in the public consciousness when in context regarding Watergate itself, meaning like the official narrative paints him to be this, really the savior and hero who was struggling with the morality and the ethical quandary he found himself in the Nixon administration as a young White House aide, when in reality he was really the key architect behind the cover up, and kind of in every plausible way you can point to is the one who provided the obstruction, evidence of the obstruction, and also kind of inspired it in the
Let's
first
get
place, which is
Gordon
very
Liddy, right? This
interesting.
guy.
Yeah, G. Gordon Liddy
Yeah.
is kind of, he's really the dupe, honestly,
Mm.
that was kind of led around on a string by McCord and Hunt, who really kind of like set him up, to, I would say, he was a supreme loyalist. He was the individual who was willing to catch a bullet in order to remain loyal to the administration. So in no way was he aware of the secret agenda that was playing out with the CIA backing, with McCord specifically, and of course Howard Hunt too. But still, even Howard Hunt himself was almost in the dark in certain aspects of what was being conducted at this time. But we should start out by saying that basically this introduction is provided in the lawsuit itself because it's kind of a recognizing the historical background and the importance thereof, and kind of also underlies the dispute of the defamation lawsuit, of course, because in essence, Ida Maxey Wells was the secretary at the Watergate in the DNC. Her desk was the desk where they were attempting to photograph documents and also set up the bugging devices, and so she was essentially inspired to file this defamation lawsuit on behalf of John Dean, because John Dean actually even provided his own attorneys to Ida Wells for her to file this defamation lawsuit against G. Gordon Liddy, because years after the fact, he wanted to shut Gordon Liddy up because essentially he was providing, first of all, corroborating the fact of what was put forward in Silent Coup and Secret Agenda, the two books that provide this revisionist narrative that we've basically been discussing this entire time. And so he kind of viewed it as one. First of all, keep in mind, I had mentioned a few episodes ago, I don't remember which one, but I had mentioned the fact that John Dean himself had actually sued the publishers of, I believe, Silent Coup, and then also named Lynn Kolodny, who's the author of Silent Coup, and a couple other authors, I think even Phil Stanford, who wrote White House Call Girl. And no one, not one page was ever forced to be retracted, right? So in essence, it was settled out of court. And so John Dean, of course, points to the fact that it was settled out of court being a victory, but in no way was it a victory. He did not win this lawsuit. Not, like I said, not one fact in the book themselves was ever rescinded or retracted. So,
I mean, settling doesn't really mean you won. So like that's just
exactly,
common
yeah.
legal stuff in general. I mean, obviously people will posture after the fact of like, if it's something with a lot of public facing attention, that it'll
Right.
be like this is clearly because, but it's like at the end of the day, sometimes people know there's odds, and I can take the money or I can take the chance of getting nothing. So
Right. And from everything I heard, the publishers essentially decided it was too expensive and it was just not worth, going through with this.
Yeah, the
suit
other
in
option is
person.
people will use the legal system to run these people dry. So it's like you just take the offer off the jump that way because it's like you don't know. I mean, you don't know if you're gonna be able to afford it. Like it's because for one, it's like if you lose, it's like now you're on the hook for all this. So
Yeah.
it's just easier just to say fuck it and like not
yeah.
go live life on a hope and a prayer that you win this legal battle. That you're
Absolutely.
losing money the whole time throughout. So like,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. And we're going to really lay out the case as to how John Dean is specifically, I would say, the architect of one. When he discovered, because he was tracking this case from the beginning, right? I think once I lay out certain details, you'll realize the fact that he was calling prosecutors into his office, demanding they show him all the evidence. It was really amazing. He had insiders in the FBI who were providing him with details of the case that weren't available, right? And it's very much, kind of eye-opening once you realize the level of involvement in not only ordering the break-in, the second break-in specifically he ordered, and we'll get into why he did. But it's hilarious to me because, like I said, that he's painted as this hero of Watergate, but this man inevitably was disbarred after cutting the deal, right, and turning key witness. But he ultimately is sentenced to only 4 months and writes like a lot of he writes a lot of the book that he then cashes in on, of course, regarding Watergate in his 4 months in prison. And of course he gets the least amount of time as far as the sentencing is concerned, but then he subsequently tours giving lectures around the nation to young attorneys on lawyer ethics. which is just hilarious to me and makes a lot of sense, honestly. It's of course you would go to an individual who successfully, right? You know what I mean? Like he was an attorney as well, which like I said, he was disbarred after all of this occurred, which is kind of ridiculous that a disbarred attorney would then right be given a cush job on the lecture circuit talking about attorney ethics. But anyway, so really we should cover the fact that Ida Maxey Wells, she was employed at the DNC
Do we know
offices.
what he got disbarred for offhand? Or
Man, I don't remember exactly what
Yeah.
the cause of it was. I
Okay.
just yeah, I should have wrote it down, honestly, because it was a little while back that I wrote this note down. But the fact that he was disbarred and then he was providing lectures on lawyer ethics, I thought was just absolutely hilarious and something worth noting, you know. But yeah, for the life of me right now, I couldn't recall. It'd probably be very simple to pull up right now, though. I had it somewhere.
What
I
did you
think
say?
I
John
covered it.
Dean. This is or not John Dean. This is J. Gordon Liddy, right?
No, this is John Dean.
Oh, John Dean. Okay,
John Dean, yeah.
John Dean, Water. All right, John Dean, Watergate. Sorry, you can keep going. I'll look it up.
Yeah, so from February of 1972 until July of 1972, Ida Maxey Wells was employed at the DNC offices in Washington, D.C., of course, located in the Watergate complex. So Wells worked as the secretary to Spencer Oliver, which that was Spencer Oliver Jr., if you remember. Spencer Oliver Sr. Just so happened to be an executive at Mullen and Company, right?
Real quick, sorry. It was a guilty plea to a single felony in exchange for being a key witness, which gave him a reduced sentence. So
in Watergate, that was the part of the Watergate,
it was just
right?
if it was cover up. So I didn't know if it was some other related thing or what the specific. It literally was just it was part of the deal that he cut with them was that he didn't get off scot-free. He got disbarred.
Can no longer practice. Yeah. That makes, it makes a lot of sense, but to then be painted as the hero and then, of course, be giving lectures is just ridiculous. But anyway, so as I was saying, Wells, she was employed at Spencer Oliver Jr.'s desk in the Watergate complex from February of 1972 until July of 1972. And basically, she was working for Spencer Oliver, who was the executive director of the Association of State Democratic Chairmen. Also remember Spencer Oliver Sr., his father, is an executive at the Mullen and Company, right, which is the company that had hired E. Howard Hunt and held the lucrative CIA cover contract. And so in the early morning hours of June 17th, 1972, Frank Wills, a security guard, summoned the police because a door at the Watergate had been suspiciously taped so that it would not lock. Upon their arrival, the police arrested 5 men. The inquiry into the now infamous Watergate break-in began, of course, and the initial focus of the investigation targeted the initial 5 would-be burglars and 2 of their co-conspirators, namely E. Howard Hunt, then White House aide, and Liddy, G. Gordon Liddy, then counsel for the committee to re-elect the president. All 7 were indicted by a federal grand jury on September 15th, 1972. Liddy was charged with multiple counts of burglary, conspiracy, and interception of wire and oral communications. Liddy, refusing to plead guilty or cooperate with the prosecution, was tried, convicted, and served 52 months in prison. James McCord, one of the 5 burglars, pled guilty to a variety of burglary, conspiracy, and wiretapping charges, but then claimed that he was pressured to plead guilty and lie during the district court proceedings. McCord's allegations implicated high-level administration officials in the White House. As subsequent investigations unfolded, the White House's effort to cover up its involvement led to the imprisonment of several high-ranking White House officials and ultimately, of course, the resignation in August of 74 of Nixon. So, since the release of G. Gordon Liddy in 1977, he engaged in public commentary through a successful radio talk show, an autobiography, and is a frequent speaker on the lecture circuit. During several public appearances, Liddy presented an alternative theory behind the Watergate break-in. This alternative theory, which is described in the 1991 book by Lynn Kolodny and Robert Getlin titled Silent Coup: The Removal of a President, alleges that John Dean had personally ordered the Watergate break-in to protect his own reputation and the reputation of his now wife, Maureen Biner. Now, Heidi Reichen, who we introduced as the madam of the Columbia Plaza, right, hooker referral pipeline, the prostitution network set up through an intermediary, which is a young attorney named Phil Mackin Bailey, and we'll get into him in a moment. But it's important to understand that Maureen Biner, wife of John Dean, which they get married very quickly after this scandal, it turns out that, well, Heidi Reichen had actually even attended their wedding, right? They had lived together, Mo Biner and Heidi Reichen, for a time before she moved in with her boyfriend, John Dean, who she then married directly after the Watergate scandal broke. It's very interesting, the timing of it all. But we'll get into it as well, because it seems as if it really was the downfall of this small-time attorney, Phil Bailey, who was considered to be the intermediary between Heidi, the Columbia Plaza, setting up the hooker referral pipeline to the DNC through his alleged girlfriend at the time, who worked at the DNC. This is the story, which is very interesting because when this guy gets arrested for violating the Mann Act and taking this young college student across state lines and allegedly running a train with his buddies on this young university student, who then apparently one of the individuals who was involved, one of the perpetrators, slipped her $20, which made it a transaction, which therefore made this a prostitution transaction. And so, of course, this became a federal crime, due to the fact that he took her across state lines. And so I believe she went to the University of Maryland or something of that nature. But either way, he inevitably they raided his law practice, and yeah, he had apparently set up his own prostitution ring, small time prostitution ring that he was running, and he had been bribing the vice cops and thought that Heidi Reichen was his girlfriend, and he was giving her all the information.
The strippers don't like you.
Yeah.
Or
he's
they're
providing
literally in
Heidi.
customer service.
Right. So he's providing Heidi with the intelligence of where the vice squad's operating around town, while he's bribing vice squad, officers. And it's just kind of interesting. Because I think his knowledge of the Columbia Plaza operation is what necessarily, I think it's what specifically actually got him, because he was, man, what happened to this guy is pretty amazing, honestly, because he's like 29 or 30 at the time. So he's around the same age as John Dean, right? But he's described as this foolish young attorney who most of his clients are, of course, prostitutes. And he runs this small law office, but he's ultimately sent to St. Elizabeth's in Washington, D.C., this mental health institution, where he's placed in a ward for the criminally insane. And you'll see the timing of when this takes place, because it'll all start to make sense.
Wait. Okay, real quick. I guess want to get ahead of this already.
Yeah.
When did this guy go to jail not to go to jail, but go to the loony bin, and what was going on at that time,
brother? June 9th.
And real quick, clarify who this is again, in case I miss names, because names get crossed. There's so many names. I'm sure the audience may have lost track too.
Crazy. Yeah. So, Phil Mackin Bailey.
Okay, the guy who was the attorney who got busted for diddling the chick on the train. But go ahead.
Yep. And so basically, his law practice is raided. And they discover this wider network of prostitution he's involved with. An article is ran about this arrest that takes place on the 8th of June. And the article is ran on the 9th in the Washington Star or something like that. We'll get to it. I have it in detail.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so named in the article is a prominent White House attorney, not by name, anonymously implicated. So who read this article sitting in the White House and shit their pants and called the prosecutor of the Phil Bailey case and demanded he come directly to the White House with all of the evidence for this case and present it to him? John Dean, right? Holy shit. It just gets so crazy because he calls the prosecutor in. I forget his name now, but I have that as well. He calls him into the White House and he demands to see all the evidence. He presents it to him. He starts reading through and he sees his wife's name multiple times referenced in this and in the evidence. And then he sees he is implicated in it, but anonymously by this term they use called clout, because of his powerful influence as this White House attorney, or aide, right, to Nixon. And as I said, like, he was 100% influencing Nixon in many ways. He's the one who influenced Nixon in the smoking gun tapes, which were revealed and inevitably caused the resignation, which was proved obstruction, allegedly, which it did. Honestly, it did. But that the implication there is that Nixon was fully aware of the intention behind the break-ins, and that's right, a false narrative. But
real quick, so Phil
Yeah.
McAnally, he got. I'm assuming, I'm assuming what happened is he went to the loony bin, and for however long and when he was there, it was probably at crucial times, whether it was legally / or like so far as like narratively or like PR wise type type of times, because this is exactly what happened with Lawrence King. In the fucking in the whole was it, how can I not think of what the fuck it's called, whatever, the Franklin affair, the Franklin affair.
Yeah.
So because like I'm pretty sure, like I don't remember specifically what he missed and stuff too, but it was clearly like a tactic of like the powerful to shuttle off their protected assets somewhere else where they're kind of untouchable. They send them off to some loony bin that you're not able to get into because loony bins are going to have distinct rules as opposed to what prisons probably have. So you're able to shuttle someone off to where they're not able to talk to anyone, they're not able to do anything. I mean, hell, this may or may not be something that's even done voluntarily by them. It might be like, yo, dog, you've gotten to a point that we're fucking taking over. They're essentially Baker acting these people in a sense, and the idea of like, listen here, bitch, guess where you're going for a fucking few months. We're gonna fucking load your ass up, kind of like what Pasternak said to fucking Kanye. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Kind of like the idea of like, it's gonna be not gonna be hanging out with the kids ain't gonna be the same, except now you're gonna be in the loony bin, just fucking zonked out on fucking Valium or whatever the fuck.
Exactly.
While they wait for all this the heat to fucking to cool off a little bit.
Right. And all this happened because, as I said, he became willing to use his knowledge of the Columbia Plaza operation as really his get out of jail free card. He was hoping to use it as a tool to, seek some sort of light sentencing in regard to his federal charges. And I think once John Dean became aware that he was willing to talk and he was willing to name names and had been naming names after he was given the evidence, and he had realized that his wife was implicated and so was he directly. I think that there was really no other option, especially since consider the fact that Phil Bailey's offices are raided. He's indicted on the 8th of June. All right, the 9th of June, the story breaks. The second break-in that fails is on June 17th. That's not even a week's time. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous, right? Of how quickly this happens, especially considering this private investigator who John Dean hires, he's sending around. That gets very interesting as well. But so let's stay in this vein of just kind of laying down. I should finish laying down this kind of like introductory foundation that we were attempting to because then I can transition more into the finer details of it, I think, because it's just such a complicated story, and it's really amazing the amount of moving parts involved. But so yes, Mo Biner, this is John Dean's future wife at the time, but Mo Biner Dean was allegedly a close friend of Erica L. Heidi Reichen. the madam of the Columbia Plaza, who operated a call girl operation out of the apartments near the Watergate complex. Now, the theory of the silent coup basically asserts that the break-in that Philip Mackin Bailey, this attorney, used his connections with the DNC to promote Riken's prostitution ring as the intermediary, according to Kolodny and Getland, when Oliver was not in the office, Spencer Oliver. His phone, which was the target of the first Watergate break-in, was used to arrange meetings between visitors to the DNC and Riken's call girls. So Bailey was arrested and indicted for various crimes, including violations of the Mann Act, as I said, and as a result, his address books were seized. Now, according to Silent Coup, Dean, upon hearing of Bailey's arrest, called the assistant United States attorney investigating the case, summoned him to the White House. During this meeting, Dean supposedly stated that he thought the Democrats had leaked the story about the prostitution ring. Dean photocopied Bailey's address book to compare it with the list of White House staff. Biner's name, Dean's wife, as well as an alias of her good friend Heidi Riken, were found in Bailey's address book. So also keep in mind, it's so much worse than that. So Heidi she collected politicians. It's so clear and obvious once you look at the Black Book, and you see all the different. There were actors, man. It was like, it wasn't just athletes and politicians. There were actors as well. Like, it was individuals of prominent influence, so similar to what we see in modern time, right? Like with Diddy and Epstein. I mean, it's just fascinating, honestly. If you look at it, it's just this recycled tactic that continues to resurface, and so keep in mind, while LBJ's president, Heidi's spending all of her time out in Texas. I think she was just clearly being utilized by organized crime, which we know that was the fact. But she told Phil Bailey, that young attorney, that she was protected by the CIA. She said that directly to Phil. It's just amazing to me. And so she had, and again, consider paperclip, because her father is a SS, right? Nazi SS U-boat captain. I mean, it's again, a repetitive notion. Marita Lorenz is the same. It's absolutely amazing. OSS, it's really, she had to, I believe they came over when she was 16 or 17 to the US, and she became a translator in the military. So she was a WAC, they called them, right? A woman in the military at the time, which was very rare in many ways, right? And she inevitably became a translator because she learned English. She was forced to learn English because she only spoke German. So it's pretty interesting. But so she has all these, names of most wealthy and powerful people in Texas, and LBJ was, of course, supported by, big oil money in Texas at the time, right? And then the DeMort Child, or what, I can't remember the name of. It's been so long since I did the Lee Harvey Oswald episode, but there's deep connections to the JFK assassination, obviously within these circles, with LBJ as well, and I think I actually explained that in detail as far as Heidi's connections as well. It's very interesting to that aspect of the JFK assassination. But yeah, beyond that, Texas congressmen, public officials, and then when Nixon comes to office, Heidi just goes straight back to DC. So. And then her Black Book, of course, happens to include the names of all these Nixon White House officials, including Sam Dash, who is counsel to the Watergate Committee, right? So counsel to the Watergate Committee, Sam Dash, his unlisted phone number was in Heidi Riken's little Black Book. Like, that's ridiculous. And so, of course, because of Phil Stanford, we know that Jeb Magruder and John Dean were also in Heidi's Black Book, of course. And so I think she even had John Dean's home phone and his private extension in the White House. So there was by no way, like I just can't see how nothing happens by accident, as they say, right? And like
Mhm.
it's just, to me, you can't dismiss that. It there's just no rational and logical way to dismiss that, right? And I think all of these details provide such a more plausible narrative to why this took place in so honestly, man, it's amazing reading these various books that because they all seem to just dovetail with each other, right? It's just it's very fascinating. But anyway, so upon Bailey's arrest, right? Like I said, John Dean calls the prosecutor. And so the implication is, of course, that Dean ordered the second and ill-fated Watergate break-in to determine whether the Democrats had information linking Biner to the Bailey Riken call girl ring, and if they did, whether they intended to use that information to embarrass him and the White House. So the authors of Silent Coup noted that one of the Watergate burglars was found to be carrying a key to Wells' desk, prompt its readers to contemplate the following unanswered question: why would a Watergate burglar have a key to Ida Maxey Wells' desk? And of course, the conventional theory is that the motive behind the break in was to just replace this malfunctioning listening device that had been installed, but they were trying to implicate really just this kind of, intelligence gathering operation on Larry O'Brien, who was, right, not even operating out of the DNC at this time. So it's kind of ridiculous to set that up as the intention behind the ill-fated break-in. But anyway, so this one of the burglars, one of the Cubans, right? He, of course, in his possession was was this key to Ida Maxey Wells' desk, and it was to this locked desk drawer. And so beginning in 1988, G. Gordon Liddy had all these extensive conversations with the authors of Silent Coup, and by 91, he had reached the conclusion that this theory was valid. And so as a result, in 91, Liddy endorsed the theory in a special paperback edition, and on June 3rd, Liddy met with Phil Bailey to discuss Bailey's involvement with the Riken prostitution ring. During that meeting, Bailey described to Liddy how the DNC procured prostitution services for some of its visitors, and according to Bailey, photographs of Riken's call girls were kept in a desk in the Oliver Wells governor's area, and various personnel at the DNC would display the photographs to DNC visitors and would then arrange meetings with the visitor's call girl of choice. So Bailey also stated that DNC employees were paid a commission on the referrals. So Liddy began routinely to incorporate this silent coup theory of the Watergate break-in, including his discussion with Phil Bailey, into his public speeches, which is why he was then, right, sued for defamation, because John Dean was getting very upset that he and his wife were being smeared. Technically, he was saying his wife's character was being smeared, right, in these allegations, which he likes to point to the fact that Phil Bailey spent time in the ward at St. Elizabeth's for the criminally insane as a reason to discredit and dismiss him because he's clearly out of his mind, right? It's a very convenient tactic, and so of course, this case was you know, completely dismissed, and Ida Maxey Wells lost the case, and G. Gordon Liddy, was not held responsible for defamation.
The whole the loony bin thing works on multiple angles.
Yeah, it
Like
really
from
does.
for like pragmatically, if you're like if you're someone who's able to move people around like chess pieces, that is a useful place to put somebody. Because on the flip side too is if they decide to burn you at any point, you're like, look at this fucking crazy person. You know what I mean?
Right.
You're in a fucking loony bin.
I know, man.
So you can play it off like, oh, he's crazy. We don't know what he did or what's the truth here. And also on the flip side, if he tries to turn against you, it's like, dude, this dude's crazy.
Exactly.
So,
It is.
yeah.
It's the most convenient thing really you could do, because who's going to believe you now, right? And that's honestly what inevitably happened to Phil Bailey. And You know what's crazy though is that Liddy, he was asked a question after he gave one of these speeches, and he then gave this following statement. He said, "Some members of the DNC were using the call girl ring as an asset to entertain visiting firemen, politicians, and to that end, they had a manila envelope that you could open or close by wrapping a string around a wafer. And in that envelope were 12 photographs of an assortment of these girls, and then one group photograph of them. And what you see is what you get. It was kept," he said, "in that desk of Ida Maxine Wells, thus the camera and all the rest of it. And what they were doing is, as these people would be looking at the brochure, if you want to call it that, and making the telephone call to arrange the assignation that was being wiretapped, recorded, and photographed. So the entire thing was a sexual blackmail operation, right?
Mhm.
And there's no better example of that than Lewis Russell, who's really proof positive that Columbia Plaza operation had long been in full swing, honestly. It's amazing because he's like this former FBI agent, has some very strange ties, right, to first of all, he's hired by McCord himself at McCord and Associates, which is, very strange in itself, right? But he was even involved in trying to find out information that could be used to blackmail Jack Anderson, the journalist that they were considering assassinating, right? Where E. Howard Hunt had taken G. Gordon Liddy to talk to a CIA poisons expert, and they were considering these different viable options on how they could assassinate Jack Anderson, this columnist who was, I guess he was really criticizing Nixon and the administration on the India-Pakistan conflict at the time. And so this was just, you know, a feasible way of getting this thorn out of their side, right?
They weren't meeting with Gottlieb, were they? I mean, I
I
doubt it,
forget his name, but it
because
wasn't
that's
Gottlieb. I know
Gottlieb.
it
That's
wasn't
Gottlieb's
Gottlieb.
department.
Right.
So,
I know it wasn't
yeah.
Gottlieb. I heard the name mentioned one time, but
Mhm.
only once so far. I'm trying to find it again, but anyway, so yeah, it's interesting because they discussed a few different ways and tactics to use, and one of the techniques was they would they, they had apparently they had conducted this way of basically 10 out of 10 times they could have an operative hit your car with another car, right? So get into a car accident, but hit your car at a specific angle where death was basically almost near 100%, right? And so they had this, I forget what the name of the technique was, but it was that. And then also the other consideration they called aspirin roulette. And that was where they would replace one of the pills in his aspirin bottle with the poison pill and wait for the poison to take effect. And yeah, that comes back into play when you consider what happens to Lou Russell. It's very interesting. But so he's, like I said, um you know trying to get blackmail on Jack Anderson, but also by 1971 he's working for this General Security
Real quick,
Services.
just to back
Yeah,
up, what
yeah.
just real quick. I don't need the whole. What did happen to Lou Russell? I'm assuming he died, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, he
What did
dies.
he die?
I'm
How would he die?
honestly, this is what I'm telling you right now, actually.
Okay.
Like,
All right.
yeah,
All right.
because
All right.
we're getting
Because
to it
we
right
were
now.
talking before, and we were kicking
Yeah.
around ideas for another Sam episode, and
Mhm.
we're probably going to go back on at some point on Tinfoil Hat, and so we were kicking around theories, and that was one. So it was like, I was like, maybe you should add that to not, because like even Watergate, like you'd be like, oh, suicides or suspicious deaths, blah blah blah.
Right.
Even just like it'd be like even Watergate, that'd be a
Mhm.
good angle, because it's like people
And
see Watergate as more like a bureaucratic or tame conspiracy,
right.
but it's like motherfuckers are dying.
Oh yeah. And you remember
Yeah.
Dorothy Hunt, man. I mean, Dorothy Hunt in that plane crash, that was by design. That was
Mhm.
an assassination. And especially knowing, and we listed in detail the individuals who were on that flight. It was even more than her, but it was very clear that she was not going to come. That plane was not going to land. Like that was just a reality at this time. And even Colson himself, Chuck Colson, all right, the guy who the guy who got E. Howard Hunt the job in the White House, who ran the fraternity at Brown with E. Howard Hunt, close friends, right? But still got him the position in the White House. He said right after Dorothy Hunt was killed in the plane crash, they murdered Dorothy Hunt. That's what he said. So it's just like everybody at the time, even, the compilation of Deep Throat allegedly is warning up to 17 times in the garage of Woodward about everyone's in danger, right? Everyone's lives are at risk. Like, that was very clear and obvious. I mean, Carl Schaffler himself, the arresting officer, one of the arresting officers who's most key, he himself, he said, if I talked about this, yeah, I would be dead, right? There's absolutely no way,
Yeah.
and so this Lou Russell, though, in 1971, and keep in mind, June 17th, 1972, the second break-in, the scandal occurs. So by 1971, and you know what's insane is that John Dean had he had ordered the first known casing of the DNC Watergate complex in October of 1971. And this was after he had sent a private investigator to investigate another hooker prostitution network called the Happy Hookers Client List. And I forget the madam's name now. I have it again in my notes here in a moment, but it'll blow you away because it's very clear and obvious that he was gathering, sexual blackmail, right? But he was also, I think, very concerned with what information was out there on he and his own, and right, like basically he and his own wife, and then also individuals within the White House itself, because they were very much implicated in these networks. And so, as we've alluded to many times in the past, there are clearly factions in DC that are vying for power, right? Consistently vying for power. And so, they also, I think, share this common interest to remain in the dark and to remain covert in many ways, right? And so it's like, in the end, they'll hang each other out to dry, but they also will kind of, come together in a common cause to remain in the dark as much as they possibly can, right? It's a very strange.
They'll kill each other, but they'll keep the overarching secret.
Exactly.
So they'll understand that there's some sort of a narrative they have to settle on, but they may fuck each other over to settle on, to get to whatever narrative settled upon. So
exactly.
But that's what we're settling on.
Exactly, man. Yeah, and so
unless you can find another way to frame it that I guess fucks the other person over while not actually revealing the truth.
Exactly. Yeah. 100%.
Yep.
But so this Lewis Russell, he gets this job at a very convenient time, and he does not keep this job for very long. But so less than a year, he's working for General Security Services, GSS. And he happens, of course, to resign in April of 1972, just before the first Watergate break-in May. And so this is also just after Jeb Magruder was allegedly given the green light to start ordering the break-ins. And he and John Dean were the ones who allegedly ordered the first two break-ins at the Watergate, right? But the second break-in, and it's very interesting because Magruder's kind of described as like a weakling, in many ways. So he's kind of just a pushover, and John Dean is more so running his own private intelligence operation in many ways, and it's very much a self-benefiting operation. People need to understand that intelligence gathering is the name of the game if you're going to seek promotion in DC. It honestly is. Like, you have to have blackmail, you have to have intelligence in order to it's honestly become a currency for power. And so if you want to even be considered to have an opportunity for one of these powerful positions, yes, you need to understand the technique and the name of the game, which is blackmail and intelligence gathering. And so that is exactly what John Dean was doing during this time when he was working in the White House as this White House aide. He was essentially running these private intelligence operations, gathering blackmail on different, you know, just political candidates, different individuals who he needed to leverage and exploit for his own interest, and for reasons that would then, of course, grant him favor within the within the minds of his superiors, right, as well, which is another factor involved. And that's what got him noticed in the first place, right? This is his connections, I think, to organized crime, right? And that he just wasn't aware that the CIA was running it through organized crime. I think that's truly what happened. And the fact of the matter is that we know Nixon himself was mobbed up. He had organized crime connections going back to when he ran for Congress, right? So it's just amazing that people are unaware of how heavy-handed, right? These really, it's more than Howard Hughes, and it's like long time organized crime syndicates. The Meyer Lansky, I forget the name of the other family that was involved directly with Nixon and his brother that really helped fund and finance his early bidding for public office. But it's amazing once you find out that these guys don't rise to power by accident, right? All of
No.
this was manufactured, you
Yeah.
know?
And the
And
crime
so,
and the intelligence community go hand in hand. They are one
absolutely.
and the same. So,
Absolutely.
I mean, it makes sense. You have these hooker things. The first thing immediately is it's going to become part of an intelligence gathering. Because it's like, why not? That's money you're leaving on the table.
Exactly.
So yeah, but all right. Sorry. I don't know
So,
if go ahead.
no, you're good, man. I keep getting off on tangents because of how much information is circulating in my mind at this
Oh yeah.
moment. I'll just be honest. It's a reality, but I'm doing my very best to attempt to at least lay out some details that will start to make sense as we kind of, proceed, because once you start to understand how these characters operate, then it all starts to make sense and it falls into perfect place when it comes to the intentions behind John Dean ordering the break-in, right? And I think that is what matters more than anything, is reinforcing the credible aspects of this revisionist narrative, because it's so much more plausible. So, um, as I said, Lewis Russell getting this job at General Security Services is a key moment. It's a key point in this operation, because I think this is how they gained entry in the first place. Why they had the key was because of Lewis Russell and his job while working for General Security Services, which was he's working as a private guard, protecting, of all things, the Watergate offices in Washington, D.C. So he also did some part-time work for Allied Investigators, a company owned by John Leon Russell. Also performed assignments for this lawyer, Bernard Fensterwald, who I think also becomes his personal attorney. And then this included investigations into the JFK assassination, by the way. And so Russell's apartment was according to Jim Hogan. This is very interesting in his book Secret Agenda. But Russell's apartment was a kind of way station for depressed hookers, a safe place with someone who did not mind listening to sad stories. No one objected then when Russell chose to idle away his leisure time in the apartments of the Columbia Plaza. He was a friend of many of the girls, a sometime customer, a freelance bouncer, and a source of referrals. This is the individual that Phil Bailey ran into when he noticed he was looking for a bathroom while at the Columbia Plaza, and he walks into this, like, it reminded me of Confessions of a DC Madam. He walked into this like cubby hole, and it's got a tripod, and Lewis Russell has a headset on, and he is listening to everything that's happening with the John and the prostitute in the next room. And it turns out that he was bragging to friends that, he was conducting this on, and even claiming that the prostitutes were well aware and that they were, complicit, right? And so it sounded like Operation Midnight Climax in many ways, right? Where the two-way mirrors and just dosing Johns with LSD and the prostitutes being fully aware and in on the operation in many ways. But it very much reminded me of both of those cases. But anyway, so it was Phil Bailey who stumbled in there and saw Lewis J. Russell, who's this former FBI agent, ex-baseball player, minor league, I think, minor league baseball player, described as like a burly guy. And he was pissed at Phil Bailey when he walked in and noticed what was happening and told him to forget everything he saw and get out of there. And so it's pretty it's pretty hilarious once you kind of hear all the different accounts and the testimonies that were being given, because all of this was not made public at the time. It's absolutely ridiculous. But yeah, so this is what Jim Hogan describes his apartment as, which is why he chose to idle away his leisure time in the apartments at the Columbia Plaza. Now, in March of 72, Russell left GSS, and it turns out that he goes to join McCord Associates. That's where he transitions in March of 1972, less than a month before the first break into the Watergate complex. He joins McCord Associates. So one of Russell's first tasks was to investigate the journalist Jack Anderson. He also purchased $3,000 in electronic eavesdropping equipment from John Leon of Allied Investigators. Russell's friend Charles F. Knight was told that this equipment had been purchased for James McCord. And also, it turns out that one of the bugging devices were supplied by Michael Stevens, I believe was his name. And he was the one who claimed that he was threatened by anonymous individuals just as Dorothy Hunt's death occurred. And basically, let me get it here. It's in one of my old notes. Yeah, Michael Stevens Research Laboratories. He sold the bugging devices to McCord and discovered during Watergate, those were the bugging devices during Watergate that were discovered, were Michael Stevens, right? Mm-hmm. And so it turns out that, this is what he told the FBI. And he told the FBI that Dorothy Hunt was flying to Chicago on her flight to see him in order to ensure his silence with a cash payment. Because as we know, Dorothy Hunt was the paymistress, right, and the courier at the time. And the smoking gun being the White House tapes showing John Dean convincing Nixon to come up with $1 million to pay off Howard Hunt, right, to keep his silence. And so this was the smoking gun of obstruction, which was, of course, completely triggered by John Dean, which is just amazing to me. But the fact that he's then claims to the FBI, this Michael Stevens, who provided the bugging devices, he claims that he was threatened just after the crash of Dorothy Hunt's plane by persons unknown who claimed that Dorothy Hunt's death was a homicide and that he would be next in line if he ever talked.
And this is Lewis?
This was Michael Stevens.
Oh, Michael Stevens. Because Lewis does I mean, I don't think we've gone to it yet, but he dies of a heart attack, but it's suspiciously timed.
It's very suspicious. He claims to his daughter he was poisoned, right? And that, he claims to his daughter he was poisoned. And he claims that, of course, keep in mind, aspirin roulette, right? He says that someone switched out his heart medication for a poison pill. That's what he said happened. So,
and then even a lot of people will point to be like, oh, it's a heart attack, but it's like, one, it's like, was it actually a heart? Like, I'm sure there probably are poisons that probably can induce heart attacks. Two, on top of that, like I've heard of cases where it clearly they rule it as one thing when it clearly isn't it. So it's like whether they didn't do a good job looking into it or whatever. I'm no medical expert, so I don't know what you need to do to confirm a heart attack. But at the end of the day, like all you need is someone to say heart attack, and now that's the official narrative. And so it's like, that doesn't mean that's how they died. They could have died of any other number of ways. I don't know, you know. So I don't know, but I'm also pretty sure they can actually induce heart attacks. So
A heart attack gun.
yeah.
You go and look at the church committee hearings again, and you watch that all the way through. You watch, was it Colby or Casey? Man, I think it was Colby, but I can't remember now. I get both of them mixed up every damn time. But either way,
church committee, they had that the memo to where like the methods of essentially of killing people. They had a term for it, but it was killing people.
Oh yeah, but did they have the footage of like they brought in the heart attack gun? They put it on the table with the vials, right? It looks like a dart gun. That's what it looks like. And they pass it up to Frank Church at the head of the committee at the front of the room, and they all look around at it. It's amazing, dude. It really is crazy. It's worth watching. I encourage anyone to go and watch it. It's not long. You can find that footage. It's kind of ridiculous to see. But it goes to show what they're capable of. There was something else they had where it was like it would essentially they could stab someone with like this shard of ice would protract. So they could basically put it right here, and a shard of ice would just go into like insert into the body and then melt, and there would be no injection point, sort of was the concept. Can't remember the details on how it was described, but that was effectively what the goal was and the technique behind it. It's really amazing once you get into the details of what they were capable of all the way back then, you know. And imagine, you know, the technological advances of what they're capable of now. It's fascinating to me. But to continue on with Lewis Russell, though, it's interesting to say the least that he was hired on by McCord Associates, and then he, of course, I had brought up Michael Stevens because the bugging equipment, which was used to tape the telephone conversations between politicians based at the Democratic Party National Committee and these prostitutes ran by Phil Mack and Bailey that worked their trade in the Columbia Plaza. It's interesting that on June 16th, 1972, Russell spent time at his daughter's house in Benedict, Maryland. This is the night of the break-in, the ill-fated break-in, which happened on the 17th, but early morning, right? Like 2-3 a.m. And so he's creating this alibi because it's very interesting that his absence from the Watergate, so when all of this first broke, before the Washington Post was effectively given their marching orders, I would say, there was an article that was published that mentioned the existence of a sixth burglar, right? And no one knew who this could be. And this was not this was even considering, right, the co-conspirators of E. Howard Hunt and G. Gordon Liddy, who were technically considered to be, right, the architects of the operation, even though it was really McCord who was running it on the ground, right? It's very strange, but there were these reports of a sixth burglar, and many people are under the impression that it was this individual, Lewis J. Russell, who was a security guard, also who had. It makes a lot of sense considering the fact that there are reports of an individual walking into the Watergate complex, going up to the security guards and having casual conversations as if he knew them personally. And McCord was with him when this happened. And so it makes a lot of sense that, of course, Lewis J. Russell would be that individual. He worked with those security guards. He knew them personally because he had just stopped working for them that very month, right? And so he's providing an alibi by going to his daughter's house in Maryland on June 1972, on June 16th. It's interesting because McCord himself uses the absence of Lewis J. Russell at this time to prolong the burglary. So it kind of like helps stage this, you know, it's very strange because it seems like Carl Schaffler, everyone knows at this point, was sitting in the Columbia Plaza right down a block away, waiting for the call.
Yeah,
go
for those who
apprehend the
forget,
burglars.
that was the arresting officer who was literally
Yeah,
just lurking there waiting,
exactly. With dual
ready to
loyalty.
enter stage left.
Exactly. With dual loyalty to military intelligence,
Mhm,
and they called him Little Blick Schaffler because
mhm,
he has his mentor was yeah, we'll get into him as well. Anyway, there's so much uh just again, so many moving parts
mhm,
here. But so to finish my point with Lewis Russell, that evening on the 16th of 72, June, Russell traveled to Washington and spent between 8:30 until 10:30 in the Howard Johnson's motel. All right, this is the exact same motel that Alfred Baldwin was set up in by James McCord to monitor the Watergate break-in process, right? It's very interesting that story as well because Alfred Baldwin was a former FBI living in New Haven when he was recruited by James McCord in May of 72. And on the 11th of May of 72, McCord arranged for Alfred Baldwin to stay at Howard Johnson's motel, this same hotel that Lewis Russell was at the very night of the Watergate break-in, across the street from the complex. And so Alfred Baldwin, the wiretap monitor, he's hired by McCord, like I said, in May, and then he's put up in the Howard Johnson's motel in the room 419 and was booked in the name of McCord's company, McCord and Associates. So McCord had been asked by G. Gordon Liddy and E. Howard Hunt to place electronic devices in the DNC and the Democratic Party campaign offices. And so the plan was to wiretap the conversations of Larry O'Brien. That's what G. Gordon Liddy was under the impression of. He was being duped. This Larry O'Brien, of course, chairman of the DNC. So this is, of course, May 28th was the first break-in that we talked about when E. Howard Hunt gets locked and gets trapped in the closet and they're drinking, but he was drinking whiskey and milk because he had ulcers. I remember
yeah.
that detail. It was very interesting. He's stuck in there with a Cuban, Eugenio Martinez, and they're like stuck in there for hours overnight because they get locked into the Watergate, and it does not go as planned. Um, but anyway, so it became Baldwin's job to eavesdrop on these phone calls, right? After he's put up in the Howard Johnson's motel by McCord in May. And so over the next 20 days, Baldwin listened to over 200 phone calls. None of these were recorded, but Baldwin made handwritten notes and typed up summaries. Baldwin allegedly did not listen to all the phone calls coming in because for example, he would take his meals outside of the room. And so, of course, logically he would miss certain calls that when he wasn't there. And so any phone calls taking place at this time would have obviously been missed. But it soon became clear that the bug on one of the phones installed by McCord was no longer working. And so as a result of this defective bug, McCord decided that they would have to break into the Watergate office again. That's the alleged narrative, right? And so this is according to Alfred Baldwin, the wiretap monitor. All right. So you have to always keep in mind this is not each. So each of these individual operatives are clearly not entirely read in on the layered agenda that's being right, that's taking place. And
Seems to
so
always be the case, yeah.
100%. And so I think that's very likely the case with Alfred Baldwin. He's just supposed to be providing the handwritten up notes of the wiretapped phone calls that he's monitoring. And so then once they decide that this bug was defective and they were no longer getting anything worthwhile, or they hadn't gotten anything worthwhile in the first place, this is when they decide to break in again. And I think maybe the bug was defective, and so they just inherently needed to replace it. But it also seems as if John Dean himself ordered this secondary break-in, and that they utilized this narrative, like this basically the CIA used the pretext to essentially utilize John Dean and his involvement with the Heidi Reichen hooker referral pipeline to really kind of leverage him against Nixon, and that's in essence what happens. But it gets a little more interesting because um, it soon becomes clear that well, keep in mind that McCord decided that they would have to allegedly replace this bugging device. And so he also heard that a representative of the Vietnam Veterans Against the War had a desk at the DNC. And so there's, again, layered operation. McCord argues that it was worth going in to see what they could discover about the anti war activists. And so Gordon Liddy later claims that the real reason for the second break in was to find out what O'Brien had of a derogatory nature about us, not for us to get something on him. So that's interesting in the context of John Dean, especially since he's attempting to find out what dirt individual operatives have on him and his wife in context to the hooker referral pipeline and the prostitution network and the operation being conducted through the DNC. So it does kind of make sense. It seems as if maybe John Dean was either it seems as if he was very concerned about possible blackmail being leveraged against him. And so he just wanted to know what that possibly could be. And I think very much this is why, especially when you realize Phil Bailey, all the details, as I said, and the evidence being provided to him on the 9th at the White House, he's clearly panicking. And so he seems to be sending investigators all around town trying to get dirt and evidence on what dirt is basically has been gathered on himself individually as an operative. So it's kind of it's very interesting, dude, but it's ridiculous at the same time. So it's hold on, let me find where I was. Hold on. It's absolutely ridiculous, this whole story. But so on June 17th, when the break-in occurred, it was, of course, Frank Sturgis, Virgilio Gonzalez, Eugenio Martinez, Bernard Barker, and McCord, who returned to O'Brien's office. And it was Baldwin's job to observe the operation from his hotel room, room 419, Howard Johnson's hotel. When he saw the police walking up the stairwell, he radioed a warning. Now, if you remember, McCord had told Barker to turn off the walkies. And so Barker, of course, turned off the walkie-talkie, and Baldwin was unable to make contact with the burglars. So when Howard Hunt arrived at Baldwin's hotel room, he made a phone call to Douglas Caddy, that attorney who I mentioned beforehand, with all the various connections to Oswald and Guy Bannister in Louisiana. And so he's a lawyer who worked with Howard Hunt at the Mullen and Company. And Baldwin heard him discussing money, bail, and then of course how they were going to achieve the bail bonds of for these original 5. And so Hunt then told Baldwin to load McCord's van with the listening post equipment and the Operation Gemstone file, which was all the black bag operations they were running, and drive it to McCord's house in Rockville. So Baldwin told his story to a lawyer and this friend and classmate at law school. And then this information was eventually passed to a strong supporter of the Democratic Party, John Casadinto. He did not tell the authorities, but allegedly passed this information on to Larry O'Brien, the DNC chair. And so the Democrats now knew that people like E. Howard Hunt and G. Gordon Liddy were involved in the break-in. So this was already making the rounds internally, in the political sphere of influence in D.C. And so, as Edward J. Epstein pointed out, by checking through the records of phone calls made from the listening post, the FBI easily located Alfred Baldwin, this former FBI agent who had kept logs of wiretaps for the conspirators and acted as a lookout. On June 25th, Baldwin agreed to cooperate in order to avoid the grand jury looking into the case. So that effectively left him struggling to find work. In 1974, he essentially becomes a substitute teacher, and he basically just falls off of the map after all of this. But it's crazy because Ida Maxey Wells becomes a substitute teacher as well. who was it was her desk that they were running all of this through. But anyway, so this to finish my note on Russell, it's important to point out that, of course, Russell was interviewed by the FBI soon after the Watergate break-in, and he claimed that during the break-in, he was in his rooming house. And the FBI agents did not believe him, of course, but none of the burglars claimed he had been involved in the conspiracy, and so he was released. But it's Bob Woodward who discovered that Russell had been working for James McCord. He interviewed Russell, but decided that he had not taken part in the Watergate break-in, conveniently. And according to Woodward, Russell was just an old drunk, so we should dismiss anything he says in the first place. So soon afterwards, Russell receives a phone call from an investigator who worked for Edward Kennedy, Ted Kennedy, in the Senate Administrative Practices Committee. It is not known what was said, but as a result of this conversation, Russell went to stay with this individual's friend, this investigator's friend. And so William Byerly, who we come to find out, William Byerly is a stockbroker with connections to the CIA, right? So he's essentially a CIA private operative. And so he goes to stay with William Byerly on the top floor of the Twin Towers complex. And Byerly was also a close friend of Lee Pennington, who both of these men had been active members of the Sons of the American Revolution. And Russell now went to work for Security International. This company was owned by James McCord and a former CIA officer named William Shea. This is after Watergate. So he's getting paid off, goes and lives in a high rent apartment. He was living in squalor before all of this took place. And then once it happens, it seems as if he's kind of a part of the payoff, right? And the cover up that's taking place. And they're really just kind of trying to treat their assets right. So hopefully they maintain their silence. But when it comes down to it, Russell's subpoenaed and things don't go well. And it's hilarious when it comes down to the reality that we're facing here. It's not hilarious. It's honestly tragic, but it's just too much of I'm tired of reflecting on these very similar cases, right? And seeing people still buy into these official narratives. So Russell,
I mean, you gotta laugh at the ridiculous nature of some of it.
You have to, right?
Yeah.
So Russell, of course, now working for James McCord and a former CIA officer named William Shea, he also carried out assignments for William Byerly, this stockbroker CIA operative. So, according to his daughter, this included several trips, Rhode Island and Connecticut. In September of 72, he did some work for Nick Beltrant at the George McGovern offices. And in April 73, Russell suffers this heart attack. Now, however, despite being unable to work, McCord continued to pay him as an employee of Security International. So here's where it gets interesting. Russell did not have a bank account, and his old friend Bernard Fensterwald paid his checks into his Committee to Investigate Assassinations fund. So he was like legitimate spook, off the record, not even functioning with an active bank account, working with two separate identities, I believe, as well. I know that Tony Ulasewicz who was another private investigator hired by John Dean, but anyway, it was eventually discovered that Lewis Russell, had indeed been involved in some way with the Watergate break-in. And so on the 9th of May in 1973, Sam Ervin asked his investigators to obtain Russell's telephone records, work diaries, bank statements. And on May 17th, this alleged contact, Deep Throat, warned Bob Woodward that everyone's life is in danger, as I said, in his garage. So the following day, Russell suffered another heart attack. This was the first day of James McCord's public testimony before Ervin's Watergate committee. So the following day, Russell suffered another heart attack. That's just ridiculous. That was the exact same day of McCord's public testimony before the Watergate committee. And so a couple weeks later, he didn't die. He's released from the hospital. Now, this is when, on July 2nd, he dies of a massive heart attack. 1973, July 2nd. He was buried the next day.
So
According
he had at least
to
3
Anthony,
separate heart attacks is what I'm understanding. I'm collecting here. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
And according to Anthony Summers, Russell had initially been hospitalized on May 18th, 1973, shortly after writing to the Senate Watergate Committee to deny having any information that would help the investigation, and 3 hours before James McCord began testifying. Russell was released from the hospital in June, but died on July 2nd of what the death certificate described as acute coronary occlusion. There was no autopsy. Russell's claim that he had been poisoned was made to his daughter shortly before his death. So I just think, man, like this, no way this is a coincidence, right?
Yeah.
Like there's absolutely no way in my mind.
I mean, this is probably honestly one of the best places to end it, unless there's something else specifically you really wanted to hit. But we're an hour 20. I feel like that hit it on like a oh shit. So that is kind of wild. It seems like they off to one of their own people. Supposedly the sixth burglar is what it looks like. And yeah, this dude was clearly getting paid off, living the high life. He was connected in with all these same people. And then as soon as he has to go in, just whoop, dead. So this is why it's like almost like the mythical sixth burglar, because we don't really know. Obviously, it seems like that was the case because he was getting ready to probably start testifying and stuff. But yeah.
And
But,
what
go
will
ahead.
just something that's very interesting. It's circumstantial evidence, but it's man, it's hard not to just really consider it as obviously being what happened, because it turns out that Lewis Russell had been mentioning to certain individuals he thought he could trust, but had career histories and intelligence, right? That he was considering after being subpoenaed, and that he was considering writing a tell-all about Watergate, and this is when he had his first heart attack, and so.
And that's when Richard Guthrie hung himself.
Exactly, man. Exactly.
Yeah.
And so Lou Russell, bouncer for the call girl ring, of course, present that night, the very night of the break-in, tapped the phone calls at the Columbia Plaza call girl operation and stated that he overheard several conversations between the call girl operation and the DNC. This is interesting because this is the circumstantial evidence that links money John Dean took from the White House safe containing excess 1968 campaign cash to two payoffs to one Lewis Russell. That would provide a direct financial transaction and a direct connection between John Dean and Lewis Russell. Now, this is during the time that John Dean is influencing Nixon to provide $1 million to E. Howard Hunt for the cover-up and the payoff. And before he turns prosecution key witness and, gets 4 months for for being the architect of the cover-up itself, which is hilarious. But so John Dean takes this money out of the White House safe, and on November 1972, $4,350. March 1973, $21,000. Dean was never able to satisfactorily account for the money he took from the 1968 fund. Prior to testifying about it, he asked Fred LaRue for a receipt for $350,000. LaRue refused, stating that he only gave Dean $328,000. Dean said that he needed some of it for his honeymoon, but he could never account for all of it. And those two, $4,350 and then $21,000, the dates and the actual amount of cash were exactly the date and amounts of cash that were received by one Lewis Russell. And it's like unaccounted for, but no one can point to it as corroborating evidence. It's considered to be circumstantial, but still, that would provide a direct connection to John Dean, because we have to keep in mind McCord and Lewis Russell, they're working together. So Lewis Russell's involvement in general directly connects CIA involvement, right? Especially considering the fact that McCord's the one who hired him after he was working as a security officer at the Watergate facility, at the Watergate complex for GSS. So he only spent a month there, and once he resigns, the break-ins began at the Watergate complex, and it was, of course, it seems as if they got the key to the complex itself from Lewis J. Russell and his time of employment there. And so they either molded the key after, one of his security guard keys during his time there, or they just stole a key. And that was the key that was on Eugenio Martinez when he was trying to swallow it as he was being arrested. So it's at the very least something, worth pointing out, is that Lewis J. Russell does seem to have been the sixth burglar, right? Yep. And also that, it's another loose end that they were not going to allow to exist without being tied off. And that's what tends to happen in cases such as this. And it looks like he's just another one of those individual examples like Dorothy Hunt was, who, they didn't come out the other end of Watergate, right? Yeah. And there was a reason for that. And I think that reason was to provide the official recorded historical account of the false narrative and, the false intentions behind the break-ins themselves. So, yeah, there's definitely, I think, a much more of a straight line that I'll be able to form for us on the next episode.
Yeah, we got
because
at least
I was
another
a little
one,
all
guys.
over the place. Do what?
Well, I appreciate you coming. You us going along with this. You coming along with me, Austin. Bringing us along in this tale. I appreciate it. I think me and you will be doing a morning stream tomorrow, which I guess does, unless you're a patron, that's not really helpful at all. If you're a public, if you're someone who's watching this when it comes out publicly, this will have already happened a week ago. But I guess me and you'll be shooting the shit tomorrow. Looking forward to that. I think it's at 10 Eastern, give or take, depending. I mean, I might end up, might have to fool the time, but usually around 10 Eastern. But I'd have you do your plugs, but I already had you do them at the beginning. But I'll just do mine real quick.
Go ahead, buddy.
I do want to let you guys know, if you guys want to support what I'm doing over here, it's patreon.com, just NoWayJose2020. Highly appreciate any support there. The lowest level is $2 at the lowest, and that gives you the early access to these episodes, these No Way Jose episodes. Usually about a week and a day or some change is usually how early you guys get these. Also allows you to be a talking head alongside me and Austin on our Already Dead episodes, which we just had Sam Tripoli on. So we had multiple patrons who were able to come on and shoot the shit with Sam Tripoli. So that's pretty fucking cool. So that's just a $2 perk. On the highest level is my sponsors. I read them off every episode. It's my co-hosts from Tower Gang, at Tower Gang Toad. I have at Abrogate D's, at ZOVERACK, at _Infinite Zeal. Jacob Daniel of the Biblical Anarchy podcast. You can follow him at Biblical Anarchy. Then Tim Tuttle. You can follow him at Jolly on Klebold. And then Will Bell with the delicious blueberry rabbit eye wine. The big fan of the show at Real Josh Elliott. And then also Torin May. I appreciate you guys supporting me. Help me do what I do. If you guys want to follow me on Twitter, at Tower Gang Jose, that's probably going to be the best social media to use for me. Best way to get a hold of me as well. Make sure to like, share, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff, guys. If you guys do any clips or anything like that, be sure to tag me and I'll be sure to share it. With that, let's get out of here. Love you all. Hugs and kisses. Bye-bye. See you again soon.